Welcome to Caring Through Cancer, a series by the Mary and John Elliott Charitable Foundation, bringing together voices of care who help to share the cancer journey for patients of the Selinsky Center for Cancer Care at the Elliott. Thank you for joining us as we walk this path together, one compassionate conversation at a time. Leanne Hanlon is the loving daughter of Colleen and Anthony Ted French. In August 2023, Ted was diagnosed with head and neck cancer. Leanne quickly stepped up as a caregiver alongside her mother, to her father, and stayed by her parents' sides through Ted's cancer journey, the good, the bad, funny, and ugly. After a courageous battle with cancer and pneumonia, Ted passed away in May of 2024. Leanne has remained closely connected to Ted's care team and has continued her engagement with Handhold, a support group for head and neck cancer patients and their caregivers. Leanne chooses to spread joy and hope to others in celebration of her father's memory. Thank you for joining us today, Leanne.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Could you share with me the story of your father's diagnosis?
Yes. And before we start there, I'd like to step back a year. So my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2022, and that was really the first opportunity we had at the Elliott. He had very early stage lung cancer and met with Dr. Katz, and it was going to be a quick 3-round radiation, very, very small, small tumor. So we did 3 rounds. That was it. That following spring of 2023, he got the all clear that it was that the radiation worked, and we were good to go. And about a month later, he had a sore throat and an earache, and what was diagnosed as, it's spring allergies. Put some meds, and fast forward. 4 or 6 weeks later, it really didn't go away. And so he was suggested to an ENT, and that is where they did a scope and they found a tumor on his vocal cords. So that sort of turned into a trip to Dartmouth-Hitchcock, and he had a biopsy, and it was determined that it was cancerous. It was stage 3. And when we were sitting with the physician, he said, well, you have a couple of options, and he was not a candidate for surgery. It was just not something that he would have even been a candidate for the lung cancer. So we chose the radiation and chemo, and the doctor had said, you have a couple of options. You can either have your treatment here at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, or you can go to the Elliott in Manchester. And having such a good experience the year prior, and the location. My parents live in Plymouth, New Hampshire, which to get out to Dartmouth, it's over the river through the woods, and especially at a time where it was in the fall weather, and we didn't want to have to worry about that. So Manchester seemed like the obvious choice, and again, with the care that we received the year prior, it was our first choice. So we started our journey again in September of 23.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your experience with the support services that were provided by the Selinsky Center for Cancer Care at the Elliott.
This is so important to me. From our first visit with Dr. Matthew, who was our medical oncologist, he was the physician that didn't hold anything back. He was we had Dr. Katz, who was this is going to be great, and you'll have your rounds of radiation. And Dr. Matthew was you are going to be on a roller coaster. This is not going to be easy. And considering what we experienced with the lung cancer, we were overwhelmed and had no idea what we were going to be going through. So that first meeting, we met with Barbara, who is a nurse navigator, and Melissa, who is a social worker, and Kayla, who's the dietitian. And the 3 of them became our guardian angel team. It was we wouldn't have made it through. And Melissa shared with us the different programs and the support systems, and I immediately jumped on that. So this was in mid-September, and there was another meeting that was going to be happening with the head and neck caregivers and survivors and cancer patients group. And so I left that meeting and said, it's tomorrow. I have to attend that. I have to start getting everything together and be informed, because I'm kind of a pit bull dressed as a poodle. I may look like I'm, sweet and innocent on the outside, but I love to have my research done and know what's going on and plan. So I attended my first meeting, and it was a small group, and it was cancer survivors. It was the social worker, and I think in my first meeting there were only 4 of us. So it was really helpful, where the 2 survivors, Don and Ed, talked me through everything. And I don't think we realized what we were in for until they shared their own journeys. And it was scary and terrifying, but also so helpful as we just kind of figured it out. And head and neck cancer is so different from, now I'm not a doctor, I don't really know what happens, but from your traditional, traditional cancer, there are so many different layers to what goes into the head and neck cancer, and the feeding tubes, and the loss of swallowing, and these different functions that we all take for granted every day. So they really helped me understand what was going to happen, and then be able to share that with my parents. And so that was unbelievable, that head and neck handhold group. We also participated, and by we, I mean my mom and I. We would go to a caregiver-specific meeting that was held at the Selinsky Care Center on Friday mornings, and it was Diane from the social work and Melissa, and sometimes we were the only 2 there. But it was amazing to have that dedicated time where we could talk about what my dad was going through in the treatments. He had the bumpiest of treatments. It was really challenging. He was in the hospital 3 times for a week at a time, and it was just, there was so much going on. So it was really almost like a therapy session for us to be able to talk through what we were going through as caregivers and have them understand. Like, that's what they're trained for. So it was really helpful to have someone listen to us. But those services were invaluable.
Your story is incredible in that, we help put care together, and we have some amazing, part of this series, we're actually going to be interviewing some of the other caregivers and some of the team members, and their thoughtfulness around not just managing, our patients' injuries, the medical elements, but also supporting the people, the caregivers, the patient themselves, in terms of the things that sometimes are taken for granted. What are some of the things, were there things that you had access to, or that you learned that were surprising, that you didn't expect in that first few weeks?
It was, okay, so Barbara's position as the nurse navigator, I mentioned, she was our guardian angel. We didn't know what that meant. What is this person? How are they going to help us? And what was so helpful, I mentioned there's so many layers to head and neck cancer, and there were so many things that needed to happen ahead of my dad starting treatment that we didn't even consider. He had to have his dental work in order because of the radiation and where it was, and the jawbone, and my dad hadn't been to a dentist in probably 10 years. So trying to find a dentist for him, and in the Lakes region where they are, it wasn't easy. And so my mom called, can you get him in? And they were like, nope, sorry, we are 6 months out. And my mom's like, we don't have 6 months. So Barbara made a phone call on our behalf and explained the situation to them and said, this is an emergency. We need him to be seen. This is holding up the treatment, and she took care of all of that. My mom, she's very strong, but in this position, it was really hard for her. My parents have been married for 52 years. My dad did everything for her. So for her to have to take care of my dad, it was really hard. And so Barbara stepping in and being that facilitator, that liaison between the ancillary care that he required and what she was doing at the Elliott, bridging that gap was so important. And it really, that was the start of, okay, we can utilize Barbara. This is what she's here for. This is how she can help us. And it was invaluable to my mom and I, our mental health, and being able to just get through and be able to start the treatment as quickly as possible. I do have one other that I'd like to mention, which we didn't even know existed, palliative care. And Dr. Keefe, I think sometimes to the layperson, you think of palliative care and hospice as like end of life, and you don't really know what that entails. And so at the beginning of our journey, we were introduced to Dr. Keefe, and we met with her, and we had no idea what that meant. And, I Google palliative care, and it's like, oh, let's get everything ready and in order. And we met with her, and she was lovely and wonderful and supportive and caring. And she really became the quarterback for our care for my dad. She kept up with what medications he was on and his comfort and what she could prescribe to him to make him feel better. And then during the hospital stays, she came to every one of them. And my dad was hospitalized 3 times for a week at a time, and she was there at every step. She would come before she started work, during, she would drop by afterwards, to making sure that my dad's overarching care was taken care of, not just the cancer treatments and the radiation or the chemo, but making sure that his symptoms were managed. He had terrible, terrible mucus, and trying to manage that, or the pain. And so she was another one of our guardian angels that we didn't know we needed. And we even did like a little group therapy, my mom, dad, and I was like, I've never done group therapy with my parents. This is weird and interesting, but it was helpful because, again, as this sort of 3-pronged, my mom as the spouse, caregiver, me as the daughter, caring for both my mom and my dad, and then trying to figure out my own mental and emotional health. It was really important that she was able to be part of our cancer journey.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. So tell me a little bit about, you stay connected. I know that you stay engaged with Handhold. And why do you stay connected with the Cancer Center and the team?
The team, like I said, they were family to us, and it was they were just amazing. They became family, and genuinely, like, it wasn't forced, and they really took an interest in my dad and my mom and I. I feel like we've made quite an impression on everyone at the hospital. Without tooting our own horn, we're fun. We like to laugh. We like to make a terrible situation better, and we would bicker and we would have fun. And so the team really became like family. So checking in with them, and we learned about their families, and as they learned about us, and some of the patients and survivors and caregivers with the handholds, they really helped us through our journey that I love to be able to give back. I want to be able to share my story because we were blind going through this. We had no idea what we were going to experience. And Don and Lucy and this gentleman, Ed, were able to share that information with us, and which was very, very helpful. And so I wanted to be able to give back. And it's important to recognize that my dad had really good care. He had wonderful medical insurance. He was very fortunate to be in the position where we didn't have to worry about what treatments it was never a concern for us. My mom and dad are both retired. They didn't have to worry about missing work or what that was like. I had a very flexible job, so I was at every chemo appointment. I was working from the hospital rooms, and it's important for me to be able to share our journey, but also give back in a way where the food pantry that the Solinsky Center has, or the Uber Medical to get people to and from. During the handhold, I met some folks over the course of the year whose spouse was working and they couldn't take time off. And how does that patient get to their treatments? And what if they weren't able to take the day off or things like that? And I'm hoping that the support that my mom and I provide is able to do really good for those who weren't in the position that we were in.
I find it interesting. I know we talked about why you chose to have your care in Manchester. I think a little bit of the convenience factor in the beginning, the location. I'd be curious, I know you've mentioned some things that you've stated that have been so meaningful. What do you think was the most surprising that you may not have expected to have either access to, or the services that were provided that you were able to receive through the Elliott?
The handhold caregivers group, or patient, caregiver, survivor, that was probably the most important, and especially having that targeted audience. I'm sure there are other cancer caregiver groups or patient groups, but because head and neck cancer is so nuanced and there's so many different layers that goes into that, it was important to really hone in on the different experiences. The first time I spoke with some of the survivors, they said, okay, your dad's starting treatment in a week or two. Great. First week is going to be fine. Second week's going to be fine. Third week is where the wheels come off. And I thought, what do you mean by that? And he said, you'll get through the first 2 or 3 weeks of the radiation every day, and you'll get two rounds of chemo under your belt. And he said, that is when the wheels will come off. That is when you won't be able to swallow. You'll lose that function. You'll start needing the feeding tube. Oh my God, the feeding tube. My dad was completely against it at first, and Dr. Matthews said, you need to do this preemptively because at the 11th hour, we won't be able to put the G-tube in. So have it, and it's nice to have if you don't need it, but it's there when you do. And it was like clockwork. 3 weeks in, the crap hit the fan, and he was hospitalized. Excuse me. 2 days later with aspirated pneumonia because of all of the mucus, and he wasn't able to swallow. And having that foresight was unbelievable. And it was like clockwork. And I said, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this. And I came home and I told my dad this. I said, listen, I talked to some survivors and they gave me some great insight. And my dad, that generational, didn't want to know nothing, didn't want any of the support groups, knew better. He knows everything. And I shared this with him. And again, as we were going through it, okay, great, no worries. And it was just nice to be able to see that turn down the road and not be so freaked out, or we almost expected it, but we were kind of just waiting for that to happen. And we hoped it wouldn't have, but it was really the beginning of the downward spiral with he never ate after that. So
I mean, it's so powerful to have that group to be able to provide you their insight and to be able to almost have some kind of steps to follow or at least a reference point. With that, knowing that you've stayed connected with that group, how does your giving back help you and your family support the grieving process?
We are about 10 months in, and we're going through so many different stages of grief, and I don't think I was ever angry because my dad was miserable. He was letting go because we were all exhausted. He was exhausted. His livelihood was diminished. And so I was never angry. I was just so blessed to have had the time with him that I did, and that I was able to care for him. Yeah. I would do it 10 times over. But knowing that he was a bright light in the cancer center, like he would say these stupid things and jokes, and everybody loved him. He was everybody's favorite patient. I know they're not supposed to say that. And whether or not it was true, it was very helpful for him. It wasn't a scary place to visit. And from probably October 10th through December 6th, he was there every day. And that didn't include the overnights in the main hospital, but it was a lot. And so us grieving and being able to stay connected, genuinely have the relationships and be able to give back and to help. I always want to pay it forward, and we're able to do that. And so I'm not I don't consider myself, I'm not an overly wealthy person, but if I'm able to make a donation that will help others, I happily will do that. I want to be able to volunteer my time. I want to be able to help other caregivers, because I feel like they're the lost ones throughout this journey. There's so much focus on the patient, which is where it should be, but to offer to help, whether or not somebody takes me up on that, knowing that somebody is there. And one of the caregivers, her name was Lucy, her husband was a cancer survivor. She would call me every week to say, how's your dad doing? How's it going? Oh, you said he was admitted to the hospital. What's happening? How can I help? Do you need to stay at my house? Like, she was so wonderful that, and I feel like she was kind of my kindred spirit. The way she managed the care for her husband was sort of exactly how I behaved in a lot of ways. And I saw this could be my future and how I can help. And so I loved being able to give back or share the nuggets that we learned, because I would go to these handhold meetings and I would say, oh my gosh, my dad got this like at-home sucker machine. And Lucy would say, well, we didn't have that. Oh my God, that's amazing that you were able to have this machine at home. Or you got an automatic pill crusher. Like, that's amazing. Where did you get that? With the amount of pills that my dad was taking, and they had to be crushed to go through the feeding tube. And again, all these things you don't realize. I'm happy to spread that wisdom, even if it's something as silly as a pill crusher or the different bandages for the feeding tube that go around the incision site. Like, it's really important to try and give back any way that I'm able to.
Well, thank you for doing that. And that knowledge and the guidance is invaluable. I think I shared with you a little bit before we started. I was in the role of a family caregiver as my dad had lung cancer 6 years ago. And I remember just being overwhelmed by almost the tidal wave of things that you're faced with. And to have somebody to help kind of show you the ropes or what you might expect. I was not able to bring my dad here for care, and I wish we were able to. It having that is just invaluable. In that spirit of kind of teaching and supporting others, could you leave us with a piece of guidance to offer someone else who might be at the beginning of a journey like the one that you traveled?
Yes, I learned so much going through all of this. It was right up my alley, though. Like, I'm very prepared. I'm very informed. I like to do my research. I like to sort of have my ducks in a row. But I came up with the ABCs of caregiving, and I'll share that with you. So A is for advocating for your loved one. It's so important to be a voice for them and ask the questions, be informed, do the research, understand what's going on. And as a caregiver, I couldn't imagine being a patient listening to everything that's going on and be able to focus on all of the other like minutia that's going on. And so I did my research. I was a Googler, probably what the physicians and nurses frowned upon, but I Googled something and then I would bring that to the table. I would say, what does this mean? What can we expect? Or just asking the questions, being informed and being an advocate. If you're at home, what do you do if something happens while you're at home? What are the signs to look for if there's something going on? And it's just important to have a different perspective, or to really advocate for your loved one, because sometimes the information isn't shared, and not in a bad way. It's just doctors and the nurses do this every day. They may take for granted that we have no idea what's happening, and maybe going a step further and explaining it, or saying we're doing this because these aren't an option for your dad. And so doing the research and being informed and asking the questions. The B is for be prepared. I wrote down everything, and I did bring my notebooks. My mom said her first meeting with the ENT, who had said, okay, there's a tumor here, he said, you better get a big notebook. And he wasn't wrong. We took notes on everything. This small notebook started when my dad had lung cancer, and I thought that it was going to go away. I only took, 5 or 6 pages of notes, and then I brought that back out when he was diagnosed with the head and neck cancer. And I started it right back up, and I had to upgrade to a bigger one, but I wrote down everything. I wrote down every nurse, doctor, staff member, receptionist. I wrote down everyone's name. I had every vital for my dad, whether it was his weight, his blood pressure, his oxygen level. We had to sort of watch his, and I'm going to probably get this wrong, his blood levels, like his HNH or something. He needed a blood transfusion. So keeping on top of those numbers, I wrote down everything. I even wrote down the funny things that he would say, and there were some doozies. He, under the influence of his meds and the chemo treatments, and I look back on it now, and it brings me joy, and my mom and I laugh, but I would say you just need to be prepared. You have to write it down, because it might not make sense in that moment, but you may reflect back on that and notice something, or say, oh, this is important to note. I had to take my dad's temperature. We had to make sure that his temperature wasn't too high, and I had a chart at home for morning, noon, and night, and I had the electric tooth, the one that you put on the forehead or in the ear. Like Amazon was at my house every other day, but definitely being prepared. And my last one is caring for yourself. This one is probably the most important, but the most overlooked. You're so busy caring for your dad or your patient or your loved one that you forget about yourself. You forget how to breathe, how to take time for yourself to recover. I was mentally, emotionally, and physically exhausted. I don't even know how I survived. It was hard. I had a family of my own. I working full time. My dogs, my husband, my home. I didn't do anything for myself. I was in a car driving to and from when I wasn't. We had rented an apartment in Manchester for my parents during this treatment because we couldn't go. I couldn't have my parents drive an hour back and forth every day. I would pack a bag. I would stay with my mom. I was working from the hospital, and no disrespect, I love the cafeteria at the Elliott, but I ate more pizza and soup than I should consume in a lifetime. It was quick. It was easy. I was driving through Wendy's. I didn't take care of myself, and it was really hard when you just go, oh my God, what have I done? I'm so focused on taking care of my dad and my mom. My mom didn't eat. She didn't want to eat in front of my dad because he couldn't. She didn't want to cook meals because it smelled too good. And so my mom lost all of this weight, and it was just really hard. You have to take time for yourself. And I know that it's so easy to say that, but even if it's you taking 5 minutes to do breathing exercises or go get a pedicure or whatever makes you happy, it's just so important for you to not neglect yourself because it becomes very easy to do that. And I would do everything all over again. I would put myself through whatever roller coaster through a thunderstorm that I was on. I would happily do it, but I think looking back, I would have done a little bit more for myself or prepared myself a little bit better. And, I carry a big handbag. I would have thrown some granola bars in there or brought a cooler with me. But so often we were being reactive to the treatment my dad was getting. I mean, there would be times, 2 or 3 in the morning, my mom would call me, oh, God, I had to call the ambulance again. We're at the hospital. Come when you can. And of course, I'm dropping everything to be there. And again, I would do it over and over with I didn't complain. I didn't complain because how could I? My dad was going through such crazy treatment and experience. How could I, who's in great health and of able body to do all these things? But it's so important to not neglect your own self-care. So definitely caring for yourself is so important.
Wow, that's great. The ABCs. Are you able to? Have you been able to?
I'm going to trademark that.
I think you
so
should.
let's let's work on that.
We've got it on camera. It's interesting the notes or the discussion you had with respect to your mom not wanting to eat in front of your dad, and I understand that. What a powerful just emotion and that sacrifice. But I'm sure your dad felt completely opposite.
He would say, eat, don't, have something. But it was like this constant battle of he wanted her to eat and she didn't want to make him feel bad. Eating and drinking was their livelihood. And so they were lunchers. They were the couple who lunched in their retirement. Their favorite pastime would be driving to a lunch destination. Excuse me. My dad had a 2004 Thunderbird convertible, and it was so important to him. And they would go to lunch and hang out and have their cocktails and eat. And when you couldn't do that anymore, it was so hard. I think he was able, through the treatments, he was able to eat for about 3 weeks. And then it was his birthday was his last meal. And that coincidentally was their 51st wedding anniversary. They got married on my dad's birthday. And so they went out and they were able to enjoy a meal, but not to the extent, because it was still, he was having some of the restriction.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that was a milestone for him. It was a great celebration, but it was also really, when you look back on it, you say, wow, that was poetic in some way.
It truly was. Is that advice that you can give patients that are either seeking your support, or with the contact through Handhold? I just think it would be so powerful to hear from someone else. Don't sacrifice yourself or your own joy at this time because your partner wants you to be happy.
Exactly. And my parents were married for so long that she didn't want to make him feel like, oh my God, that hamburger, that smells so good. And but it's important to, we were like eating in secret. We didn't eat at the house when he was home. We would always go out. And we were at the hospital so often, so we weren't, that was sort of behind the scenes, but it really is important to take care of yourself. Last month I went to the Handhold meeting. I was able to go in person. Most times I do attend virtually just because of my work schedule, but I was driving through Londonderry and I went in person, and it was so wonderful to see everybody and be able to give everyone hugs. And there was a guest speaker there who was a woman that was teaching mindfulness and different meditation. And it was really geared towards the patient. And I had said to Diane, the social worker, afterwards, I said, Diane, this would have been so helpful as a caregiver, even as a quick reminder of this is the 5 minutes you can spend breathing and just thinking and meditating and relaxing, just to take 5 minutes to recharge. That having that reminder or that resource, hey, go to this website, this place, and do 5 minutes, because again, you're just so in the thick of it that you don't remember that you need to breathe. Put your oxygen mask on first. It really, I wasn't doing that. And so having someone remind you to say, oh, like a newsletter or an email, because we're all on a group email. Hey guys, here's, your weekly reminder. Take 5 minutes to meditate and breathe, and here are some links to some resources. And she was very receptive to that. She said, that's a great idea. We'll work on incorporating it. Because sometimes I feel like the most obvious thing is something that we may not pick up on. And that's it, just having it in the welcome packet. I don't remember receiving a welcome packet because my head was spinning, but being able to reflect back on that would be so helpful, especially during the really stressful times.
Well, thank you so much for what you've done to stay connected to those who are seeking that kind of information, the folks from Handhold and our team at the Selinsky Center for Cancer Care. I think that brings us to the end of our interview session. Anything else that you would want to add, or anything that you think we may have missed?
I'm just so honored to be here, and I never thought I'd be sitting in in this lovely room talking about this, but as hard as this was to experience, it was made easier by the care that we received and the relationships that we formed, and don't settle for anything less. If you really get to know your care team and I also think it's so important. Sometimes there's this like anger that comes out from the caregivers and the nurses and the doctors and even the receptionists, like Sophia at reception. Oh my gosh, she was so caring. I don't think any of them get enough credit for what they do every day. They come to work to help your loved ones. And while it's a very special role, I don't think I can do it. I would probably cry every day. And I did actually think about becoming a medical assistant after everything that I went through last year. I was like, oh my God, I could do this. I could talk to patients. I could take their vitals. I could be, after going through this, that role was so important. You know, they're the first person to greet the patient and they set the tone for that appointment. And, but I don't think the care team gets enough high fives or shout outs. And it's so important because they're the ones who are really taking care of your loved ones.
Yeah, they truly are awesome. You know, being having worked with, you know, whether it's our MAs, our nurses, the therapists, the some of the techs, their compassion. You know, we talk a lot. The science helps us manage our patients' needs. The people and the compassion make all the difference. And, you know, the Elliott Health System has a core mission that is to inspire, heal, and serve. And our staff and our team at the Selinsky Center for Cancer Care live that every day.
Absolutely. And I was remiss in mentioning the folks in the infusion center. They were wonderful too. They put up with my father, and it was always a joy. We had usually the same nurses each time, and they were so wonderful. And as you mentioned, compassionate. The compassion and empathy that we felt every time we walked through that door was just, it was, we could never repay them. And so for my mom and I to continue to support the Cancer Center is just our greatest pleasure. And we're happy to be as involved as we can be.
Well, on behalf of our team at the Elliott and the Selinsky Center for Cancer Care, thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. You're very welcome.